She didn't ask for the keys. She held out her hand and waited, like I was a valet at her building. That moment, her palm open, chin up, eyes already somewhere past me. That is the image I keep coming back to. Not the sound. Not what came after. Just that hand. Like I owed her something I'd forgotten to pay. Let me back up. My name is not important right now. What matters is this. I spent 41 years building a commercial real estate business in Edmonton. I started with one small strip mall in St. Albert that I bought with money I'd saved working construction through my 20s. I slept 4 hours a night for a decade. My wife, Diane, used to joke that she married the man who loved concrete more than conversation. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she also knew that everything I built for her, for our son, for the family we were making together. Diane passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was 61 years old, and she was the most graceful person I have ever known. After she died, I kept working because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. My son, our only child, was 34 when he met the woman who would become his wife. He'd been living in Vancouver for about 5 years by then, working in tech, making decent money. We talked every Sunday. He was thoughtful, funny, a little quiet, a lot like his mother. I was proud of him in a way I never quite knew how to say out loud. He told me about her in September, said she was remarkable, said she was the most driven person he'd ever met. I asked what she did. He said she worked in luxury brand consulting, whatever that means. I said I looked forward to meeting her. I met her at Christmas that year. She flew out with my son to Edmonton. She was polished, I'll give her that. Beautiful in that deliberate way. Every detail considered, nothing accidental. She shook my hand and said it was wonderful to finally meet me, and I remember thinking she said it like she was doing me a favor. Over dinner, she asked about my properties. Not the way you ask out of politeness. The way you ask when you're taking inventory. I told my son afterward that she seemed very focused. He laughed and said that was just her way, that she was intense until she trusted you, and then she'd open up. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I'm a fair man. They got engaged the following spring. My son called me on a Sunday morning, voice full of something I hadn't heard in years, genuine happiness. And that mattered to me. That mattered more than anything else. He asked if I would help with the wedding costs. He said she had a vision for the kind of event she wanted, and that her parents, who lived in West Vancouver, wealthy by any measure, had agreed to contribute toward the venue and flowers. He asked if I could cover the catering, the rehearsal dinner, and the honeymoon. I said of course. He was my son. What I didn't know then, what I should have asked, was that her parents contributing toward the venue and flowers meant they had offered to cover a modest amount, and that my son and his wife had already decided the gap would be filled by me. By the time I understood the full picture, deposits had been paid and plans were set. The total came to just under $94,000. I am not telling you this to complain. I could afford it. What I couldn't afford, what nobody tells you to budget for, is the feeling of being managed. The wedding was held at the Rosewood Hotel, Georgia, in downtown Vancouver. A Saturday in late June. 220 guests. She had wanted outdoor ceremony space and the hotel's ballroom for the reception, and she got both. The florals alone were $40,000. I know because I saw the invoice. I flew in 2 days early. My son had suggested I stay at the hotel, which I did, in a standard room while his new in-laws had a suite on the 14th floor. I noticed things like that and told myself not to. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening. Everything went smoothly. She was charming. Her parents were pleasant enough. My son seemed happy. I gave a short toast. People laughed in the right places. I went to bed thinking maybe I had misjudged her. Saturday arrived clear and warm. One of those Vancouver summer days that make you understand why people pay what they pay to live there. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't take that from her. The flowers, the lighting, the way my son looked when he saw her at the end of the aisle. I cried, which I hadn't expected. I thought of Diane. I thought about how much she would have loved watching him get married. The reception started around 7. I was at the head family table. The room was full, the music was good, and for the first 2 hours I was genuinely glad I was there. It was around 9:30 when she approached me. My son was on the dance floor with her father. She came to my side of the table and crouched down to my eye level, which I've since realized was calculated. It looked intimate, but it kept the conversation quiet. She said she'd been thinking about practical things, said now that they were married, it made sense to talk about the future. About the penthouse. I own a condominium on the 16th floor of a building in Yaletown. I bought it 7 years ago as an investment property and have been renting it out. It's worth approximately $2.3 million in the current market. I had mentioned it once, in passing at a family dinner 8 months earlier, something about Vancouver real estate and where the market was headed. She had not forgotten. She said she and my son had been talking about buying property, that Vancouver prices were impossible, and that it would mean everything to them if I transferred the Yaletown condo to my son's name. As a wedding gift, she said it as though she was describing something that had already been agreed upon, and I simply hadn't been notified. I looked at her for a moment. I kept my face calm. I said that wasn't something I was prepared to do. She smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. She said she understood it was a big ask, but that family takes care of family, and that my son had given so much to building a life out here, and didn't I want to make things easier for him? I said my son had a good salary and a good life, and that I had already contributed significantly to this wedding, and that a $2 million property was not a gift. It was a transfer of wealth that would affect my retirement and my estate, and it was not happening tonight or any other night because she asked. The smile left. She said quietly but with absolute clarity that she had expected more from me, that her own father would never make his daughter's husband struggle, that she had told my son I would be generous and that she'd been wrong about me. I said I was sorry to disappoint her and wished her a happy wedding night. She stood up, and then, I still find it difficult to fully process this. She said that if I wasn't going to give them the condo, she at least expected the rental income from the property to be redirected to my son. As a gesture of good faith, I said no. That's when she grabbed my wrist. Not violently, not like she was going to hurt me, but she grabbed my wrist and squeezed and said through her teeth that I was making a mistake, that I needed to think about what kind of relationship I wanted to have with my son and his family. I stood up. I am 63 years old, and I am not a small man. I looked at her and I said, "Let go of my wrist." She did, and then she turned and walked back toward the dance floor like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment. A few people nearby had seen. Not many. Enough. I picked up my suit jacket from the back of my chair. I walked to the lobby. I sat down in one of those low chairs near the windows that look out over Georgia Street, and I called my lawyer. Her name is Beverly. She has handled my business affairs for 22 years. She picked up on the third ring, which tells you something about her, and I told her what had just happened. She asked me 2 questions. Then she told me to come to her office Monday morning and to not do anything until then. I went back inside. I found my son and I said I wasn't feeling well and was going to head up early. He looked at me with some concern. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I was just tired. I hugged him and told him I was happy for him. That part was true. I did not sleep much that night. Monday morning, I was in Beverly's office at 8:30. We spent 3 hours going through everything: the condo, my will, the structure of my business holdings, the trust I'd set up years earlier that Diane and I had intended for our son's eventual inheritance. Beverly is not a warm person in the conventional sense, but she is precise. And when she told me what my options were, I felt something settle in my chest that had been loose and rattling since Saturday night. We restructured things. The condo went into a holding company I control. It is no longer a personal asset that can be accessed through family law or inheritance claims without my explicit consent and participation. The trust was amended. My son remains the primary beneficiary, but distributions are now at the discretion of the trustee, which is to say, me, until I decide otherwise. The timeline and conditions were formalized in writing. I also called the property management company and confirmed that all rental income would continue to flow to my personal account as it always had. My son called me on Wednesday. His voice was different, flat. He said he'd heard I had an issue at the reception, that his wife was very upset, that I had said some hurtful things to her during what was supposed to be the most important night of her life. He asked if we could talk about it. I said I would be glad to talk about it. I said I wanted to hear exactly what she had told him. He told me she said I had become cold and dismissive when she tried to have a warm family conversation with me, that I had made her feel unwelcome, that she had tried to connect with me and I had rejected her. I listened to all of it. Then I told him what actually happened, word for word as best I could recall. I told him about the condo demand. I told him about the rental income. I told him about her hand on my wrist. There was a long silence. He said that didn't sound like her. I said I understood that. I also said it was what happened. He said he would talk to her. He called back 4 days later and said his wife stood by her version of events and that she was deeply hurt by what I was implying. He said he believed his wife. He said he hoped I would reconsider my attitude toward their marriage. I said I loved him and that would never change. I also said that what I did with my assets was my business and that no one, including his wife, was entitled to my property and that if he needed time to think, I understood. He did not call the following Sunday. That was 11 months ago. I have spoken to my son 4 times since then. Each conversation has been short and careful, like we're both walking on ice and measuring each step. He came to Edmonton at Thanksgiving, alone. She stayed in Vancouver, and we had dinner together, the two of us, at a restaurant near my building. He looked tired. He ate quickly. He asked about the business, and I asked about his work, and we talked around everything that mattered. At the end of the night, when I walked him to his rental car, he stopped with his hand on the door and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, she's not a bad person." I said I hoped that was true. He said she just wanted security. I thought about that for a while after he drove away. I thought about what Diane would have said. She always had a way of finding the charitable interpretation. Maybe she would have agreed with him. Maybe she would have said that a woman who grows up watching wealth move through families starts to see it as a language, and that demanding it is just how she speaks. I don't know. What I know is this. I worked construction in dirty temperatures to save for that first strip mall. I drove a second-hand truck until I was 45. I packed my own lunch every day for a decade because I was putting everything back into the business. The penthouse in Yaletown is not old money. It is gold mornings and calloused hands and years of Diane saying, "We'll get there. We'll get there." Nobody holds my wrist and tells me what to do with it. I see a financial advisor now who is helping me think through the estate plan more carefully. The business is doing well. I go to the gym 3 mornings a week at a facility near my office in Edmonton, and I have coffee afterward at a place on Jasper Avenue where the owner knows my order. My life is quieter than it was. I don't know yet if that is loss or relief. My son's birthday is in March. I sent a card this year with a handwritten note inside. He texted back, "Thanks, Dad. Love you." I read that text probably 10 more times than I should have. I'm not sure where this ends. I'm not sure it has ended. What I told Beverly the morning after the wedding still stands, and she has it on file. The Yaletown property stays in the holding company. The trust conditions remain unchanged, and any future changes require a conversation between my son and me alone, not mediated by anyone, not influenced by anyone, not rushed. He knows where I am. He knows my door is open. The rest, I suppose, is up to him. There's a moment I keep returning to. Not the grab, not the conversation in the ballroom, but the drive back to my hotel that Saturday night. The way the city looked through the cab window, all that light, all those people out on a warm June evening, completely unaware that somewhere in a ballroom on West Georgia Street, something in my family had quietly broken. I've had 11 months to sit with what happened, and what I keep coming back to is this. The consequences my daughter-in-law brought on herself weren't the result of my anger. I wasn't angry that night, not really. I was clear, and I think that clarity, calm, unhurried, grounded in 41 years of knowing exactly what things cost, is what she didn't expect and couldn't navigate. People who reach for what they haven't earned tend to count on one of two reactions. Either you give in out of love, or you push back hard enough that they can reframe themselves as the victim. I did neither. I said no. I walked to the lobby, and I called Beverly. That's it. And somehow that was the most devastating thing I could have done, because it left no drama to hide behind. What I've come to understand about my son is harder to sit with. He's not a bad person, I believe that. But somewhere along the way, he stopped trusting his own read on things and started deferring to someone whose judgment was shaped entirely by what she wanted. That's not a character flaw exactly. It's more like a failure of nerve. And I know something about that. Because I spent my 20s second-guessing every business decision I made, until I learned to trust the numbers in front of me instead of the noise around me. That capacity to think clearly under pressure, to weigh what's real against what's being presented to you, that's something you either develop deliberately or you don't develop at all. Diane used to say that raising a child well meant raising someone who could eventually disappoint you and still be okay. I thought I understood that when she said it. I understand it differently now. It means you do the work, you set the example, you show them what it looks like to live with integrity and make hard calls without flinching. And then you let them make their own choices, even the ones that cost you Sunday phone calls and quiet Thanksgivings. What I couldn't give my son, what nobody can give another person, is the willingness to stand firm when standing firm is uncomfortable. That has to come from inside. It has to be practiced. It's built slowly, the way anything real is built, through small decisions made honestly over a long period of time, not through grand gestures or windfalls. The condo is still in the holding company. Beverly checks in quarterly. My life in Edmonton continues, a little quieter than before, and I have made my peace with that. If my son reads this one day, and maybe he will, I want him to know that the door I mentioned is still open. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I haven't. And because I'm still the same man who packed his own lunch for a decade and drove a second-hand truck and believed, without any evidence except stubbornness and early mornings, that things would eventually work out. They did. They still are.